Welcome to the deep dive. You know, we talk about a lot of complex topics on this show,
We do, yeah.
but today we're going to get back to basics. We're diving into something that just about everyone interacts with on a daily basis, the spring water market.
It sounds pretty straightforward at first glance.
Yeah, I mean, water, right?
Hmm.
But you shared this recent report with me, and well, it turns out there's a lot more to it than meets the eye.
Definitely. There's a lot going on beneath the surface, so to speak, whether we're talking about individual consumer choices or these larger global economic trends. Getting a grasp on the spring water market offers some really interesting insights.
Okay, so let's get into it. This Global Spring Water Market Report 2025. It covers the period from 2025 to 2033, with 2024 as the base year.
Right?
And right out of the gate, one of the most striking things is the sheer size of this market.
Yeah, I mean, the report projects a market value of USD 262.84 billion in 2025.
That's a huge number.
And that's just the starting point. By 2033, it's projected to reach USD 555.28 billion.
Wow, so we're talking about more than double the market size in less than a decade.
Exactly. That translates to a CAGR, a compound annual growth rate of 9.80%.
So I think it's worth pausing for a second and, really letting that number sink in for our listeners. Almost a 10% growth rate every single year for almost 10 years.
Yeah, this isn't just like a gradual, steady increase. This is like a snowball effect. Each year, the market gets significantly bigger.
So what's the main engine driving this growth? What's at the heart of this expansion?
I think it boils down to a pretty fundamental shift in consumer behavior, really a global trend. People are increasingly looking for healthier beverage options.
Right.
They're moving away from sugary drinks, and they're turning towards options that are perceived as, well, more natural and healthier.
Right.
And spring water fits right into that trend.
It's interesting because that trend plays out a little differently in different parts of the world.
Absolutely.
The report dives into these regional variations, and North America is currently the largest market, right?
That's right. In 2025, North America is projected to account for over 40% of the global market,
Wow.
with a value of about USD 76.22 billion.
So that growth rate we were talking about, that 9.8% globally, how does that compare to North America?
Well, the projected CGR for North America is a little bit lower, 7.8%.
Okay.
But that still means the market will reach a pretty substantial USD 138.82 billion by 2033.
Still a lot of growth. And within North America, the U.S. is the real powerhouse, I imagine.
Oh, absolutely. The U.S. market alone is estimated at USD 60.14 billion in 2025, and they're looking at a CGR of 7.6%.
Wow.
But Canada and Mexico are also significant players.
Right.
Canada's market is around USD 9.15 billion in 2025 with a TGR of 8.6%, and Mexico's at USD 6.94 billion with a TGR of 8.3%.
So it's a pretty healthy picture across the board in North America. Now, beyond this general shift towards healthier drinks, what are some of the specific factors driving this demand in this region?
There are a couple of things, I think. You've got this growing segment of health-conscious consumers who are really paying attention to things like the purity and mineral content of their water. They're reading labels.
Absolutely.
And of course, that shift away from sugary drinks, that's definitely playing a major role. But another thing that's really interesting in North America is this increasing demand for sustainable packaging.
That's fascinating. Now, Europe is the second largest market in 2025.
That's right. In 2025, they're holding over 30% of the global spring water market, a market size of USD 97.25 billion.
And their projected growth.
It's quite strong. 8.2% CAGR, which would bring the market to USD 183.24 billion by 2033.
That's big. Now, Europe is a really diverse region. Which countries are we talking about when we see these numbers?
Well, the UK is a major player with USD 16.34 billion in 2025 and a really robust TAGR of 9%. And Germany is even larger at USD 19.26 billion, and they've got a TAGR 8.4%.
That's a lot of spring water.
Yeah. And then you've got France, Russia, Italy, Spain, all with substantial markets and their own unique growth trajectories. You even see really impressive growth rates in places like Sweden, Denmark, Switzerland, even Luxembourg.
So are the factors driving demand in Europe similar to what's happening in North America?
I'd say there's definitely a lot of overlap. Health awareness is a big one.
Right.
And then there's this preference for natural and sustainable products. And that's really strong in Europe.
Yeah.
But one thing that adds another layer to the European market is the regulations around water quality.
Oh, right.
They have very strict standards.
Yeah.
So for consumers who are, concerned about getting the purest, safest water, bottled spring water offers a kind of guarantee.
Makes sense.
And then, of course, you have some very well-established premium spring water brands in Europe.
Right, which adds to that market value. Now, let's shift gears and talk about Asia Pacific. It's currently a smaller market, but has the highest projected growth rate globally.
Yeah, that's right. It's really interesting. Asia Pacific currently holds about 23% of the market in 2025, with a value of USD 63.08 billion. But their projected CAGR is 12.6%.
Wow, that's significant.
Yeah, it's the highest of any region. By 2033, it's expected to reach USD 162.97 billion. So if you're looking at future growth, this is the region to watch.
So who are the key players driving this growth in Asia Pacific?
Well, China is, unsurprisingly, the dominant force in the region. Their market size is USD 26.49 billion in 2025, with a CAGR of 12.1%.
That's huge.
And India is also growing incredibly fast. They have a CAGR of 14.5%, with a market size of USD 6.31 billion. And then you have Japan, South Korea, Australia, the whole Southeast Asian bloc, all showing really strong potential.
And even smaller markets like Singapore and Taiwan are seeing impressive KGRs.
Exactly. So what's behind this kind of explosive growth in Asia Pacific? It seems like a lot of different forces are coming together at once.
Yeah.
Well, health awareness is, it's a global factor.
Right.
But in Asia Pacific, there's this very strong cultural affinity for natural water sources. And you have these rapid urbanization trends, rising incomes, more disposable income, so people have more ability to actually purchase bottled water.
Right.
But perhaps the biggest factor in a lot of these Asia-Pacific countries is the concern about tap water quality and safety.
Right. So bottled water is a much more reliable option. Now, how does South America compare?
South America is smaller compared to those big markets in North America and Europe,
Right.
but they're still showing really noteworthy growth. In 2025, they account for just over 5% of the global market at USD 9.99 billion. But with a projected CAGR of 10.5%, the market's going to reach USD 22.21 billion by 2033.
And which countries are we mainly talking about in South America?
Brazil and Argentina are the big ones. They're both seeing double-digit KGRs. But Colombia, Peru, and Chile are also contributing to that overall growth.
So I'm sensing a theme here. Are the drivers in South America similar to what we see in Asia Pacific?
There are definitely some parallels. You've got that health consciousness, the rising demand for natural water, and then the rising incomes, allowing more consumers to make that choice.
Right.
But like parts of Asia Pacific, concerns about tap water quality are also a big factor in South America.
So let's wrap up the regional picture by looking at the Middle East and Africa.
Okay.
Now, these are smaller markets currently in terms of their overall share, but they both show really significant growth potential, especially Africa.
Yeah. The Middle East has about a 2% market share in 2025, with a size of USD 10.51 billion, and their projected CAGR is 11.1%.
Okay.
The key markets there are Saudi Arabia, UAE. Africa, on the other hand, is currently at about 1% of the global market at USD 5.78 billion, but they're projected to have the highest CAGR of all regions at 19.2%.
19.2%. That's almost 20% growth every year.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. By 2033, the market is expected to reach USD 23.6 billion.
Wow. So what's driving this kind of rapid expansion in these regions?
Well, in the Middle East, a big factor is water scarcity, coupled with a high demand for clean, safe drinking water. And, of course, the climate plays a role. When it's hot, people need more water.
It's basic.
But health consciousness is also a factor there. Now, in Africa, a critical driver is really basic access to safe drinking water. A huge portion of the population just doesn't have reliable access.
So bottled water becomes a necessity.
Absolutely. And as you have ongoing urbanization and growing awareness of health and hygiene, that demand just keeps rising.
Now, so we've talked about all these different regions, but the way spring water is actually packaged, the containers, that also plays a role in shaping this market. Right?
Exactly.
So we've got bottled versus canned. Bottled is still the king, right?
Yeah, bottled water is still dominant.
Okay.
It's got that convenience factor. It's perceived as safe.
Right.
And it often has that kind of premium image. For a lot of people, bottled water just offers this guarantee of purity. It's portable. It's got a longer shelf life, which is really important in areas where, you can't necessarily rely on tap water.
But I've definitely noticed more canned water options popping up lately.
You're right. And the report points to canned water as the fastest growing segment.
Really? So why is that?
It seems to be driven by this, this growing preference for eco-friendly, sustainable packaging.
Oh, right.
Aluminum cans, they're highly recyclable.
Yeah,
And that resonates with consumers who are environmentally conscious.
for sure.
Plus, cans do a great job of keeping the water cold.
Right.
And they're gaining popularity, especially for on-the-go consumption.
So how does all this spring water actually get to us? What are the main ways people are buying it?
Well, right now, the biggest share goes to hypermarkets and supermarkets.
That makes sense.
I mean, they're everywhere, right?
Yeah.
They offer bulk buying options. They've got a huge selection of brands. It's just convenient.
But online retail, that must be a growing part of the equation.
Oh, absolutely. Online retail is expanding incredibly fast. You've got the convenience of home delivery. You can set up subscriptions.
It's easy to buy in bulk. And it's all supported by, that growing internet access and people using digital payment methods.
Okay, so let's do a quick recap for our listeners. Make sure we're all on the same page. The global spring water market is booming.
Yeah.
And a big reason is that people around the world are making healthier choices.
Right.
They're choosing bottled water more and more.
Yeah.
Although canned options are gaining traction.
Yeah.
Supermarkets are still the main place we're buying it.
Mm-hmm.
But online retail is a growing force.
Absolutely.
Now, the report also digs into some of the key factors that are shaping this market.
It does.
The drivers, the things that are pushing that growth.
Right.
The restraints, the things that might slow it down, and then some of those emerging trends to watch.
Yeah.
So we've talked about some of the key drivers, like this growing awareness of health benefits and the demand for, premium and sustainable options. But what else is pushing this market forward? Well, one thing that really stands out is the expansion of distribution channels.
Okay.
As spring water becomes more readily available, more places to buy it, more ways to buy it, more people are going to buy it.
That's just logic, right?
Exactly.
But what about the flip side? What are some of the things that might hold back this growth?
Well, a big one is cost.
Right.
Production and distribution, it can be expensive.
Yeah.
And that could make it less affordable, especially in, lower income regions.
Right. Not everyone can afford bottled water, even if they want to.
Right. So access becomes a big issue.
Okay, so looking ahead, what are some of the key trends we should be watching in this market?
Well, we've already talked about sustainability.
Right.
That preference for eco-friendly packaging. Canned water is a good example of that. But we're also seeing a growing demand for those premium and flavored waters.
Oh, interesting. So people are getting more specific in their tastes.
Yeah, they're looking for variety, specific benefits. Maybe it's added electrolytes, or maybe it's a specific flavor profile.
Now, the report also gives a little glimpse into the competitive landscape.
It does.
What's happening there?
It's a very dynamic market, very competitive. The major players are always working to expand their product lines, introduce those premium offerings.
Right.
You're even starting to see those functional spring waters with added benefits. But one thing that's really interesting is that smaller local brands are gaining traction.
Oh, who?
They're really emphasizing that natural, mineral-rich quality of their water and their commitment to sustainable practices.
So consumers are responding to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the report specifically mentions Icelandic Glacial. They seem to be really actively building their brand presence.
I've seen their stuff around. What are they doing specifically?
Well, they've been a big sponsor at the Food and Wine Festival circuit,
Okay.
which is a smart way to reach a certain kind of consumer, someone who appreciates those premium brands.
Right.
They've also secured some equity funding, so they're clearly planning to expand.
So we've got this mix of, these big global players and these smaller, more agile brands all competing for a piece of this growing pie.
Exactly. It's a really interesting dynamic.
So for you, our listeners, what does all this mean? We've spent some time digging into this Global Spring Water Market Report 2025.
We have.
And the big takeaway is this market is growing, and it's growing fast.
Yeah.
We're talking about nearly doubling in size by 2033.
Right.
And that's largely driven by this global shift towards healthier drinks.
Yeah.
Now, each region has its own unique story.
Absolutely.
Asia Pacific, Africa, those are the ones to watch for really explosive growth.
Mm-hmm.
And those concerns about water quality, the rising incomes, those are some of the big factors at play.
Right.
Bottled water is still the king, but canned water is coming up fast.
Yeah, definitely.
Largely because of that sustainability factor. And supermarkets, those are still where most people are buying their water. But online shopping, that's becoming more and more important.
Absolutely. It's the future.
So think about it this way. As this market grows, as more and more people choose spring water, how is that going to impact access to clean water in different parts of the world?
That's a really important question.
What about sustainability? How do we balance this demand for spring water with the need to protect the environment? What kind of innovations are we going to see in packaging? How are companies going to source water in a way that's responsible and sustainable?
Yeah, I mean, these are the big questions moving forward.
It's something for all of us to consider.
Absolutely. And for our listeners, you know, think about what we've discussed today and apply it to your own local context.
Okay.
Look at the trends in your own region.
Yeah.
Maybe check out some of those local spring water brands. Do a little research on sustainable packaging.
See what's happening in your own backyard.
It's a fascinating market, and it's only going to get more interesting.